I used to work as a night manager at a small but historic hotel in Pennsylvania. The place had been around since the 1800s, with creaky wooden floors and dimly lit hallways, the kind of place that felt frozen in time. One night, a man checked in around 10:30 p.m., requesting room 327, an old suite at the far end of the third floor. The odd part? That room had been out of order for months due to ongoing renovations. Still, the guest was adamant. His name was Daniel Price, and he insisted he had stayed in that room before. Against my better judgment, I handed him the key. The next morning, housekeeping called me in a panic. The bed had been slept in, the shower used, and there was a half-eaten meal on the desk, but Daniel was gone. His belongings were neatly arranged on the dresser, including his wallet, phone, and car keys. The window was locked from the inside. Security footage showed something impossible. Daniel Price never left the room. No exits. No movement in the hallways. It was as if he had simply vanished. The police were called, and an officer who had been with the force for over 20 years went pale when he heard the name. "That's not possible," he said. "We had a Daniel Price go missing in that exact room in 1973. He was never found." When they pulled up old records, they found his photo, same face, same name, same man. But how could he have checked into the hotel 50 years later? Room 327 remains permanently closed now, but sometimes guests say they hear the sound of a man softly whispering in the hall, as if trying to check out, but never leaving. I used to work as an overnight security guard for a large apartment complex. My job was simple: patrol the parking lot, check for suspicious activity, and monitor the security cameras. One night, around 4:45 a.m., I was doing my usual rounds when I saw movement in one of the third-floor windows. A woman in a white nightgown stood by the glass, staring down at me. I radioed the front desk. "Hey, do we have anyone in apartment 305? Silence. Then the receptionist responded, her voice shaky, "That you need. Has been vacant for 3 months." I shined my flashlight at the window. The woman didn't move. She just stood there, her long black hair covering half her face. Something felt wrong. I went inside to investigate. The apartment was locked. I used my master key and slowly stepped in, my flashlight scanning the empty living room. The air was ice cold, and I felt something watching me. I checked the bedroom last. The moment I stepped inside, my radio crackled, and the receptionist's voice whispered, "She's right behind you." I spun around, nothing, but the closet door was now wide open, and inside, written in red marker on the wall, was a message. "Why did you let him kill me?" The next day, I learned that 5 years ago, a woman was murdered in that apartment by her boyfriend. He was never caught. To this day, I don't know if she was trying to warn me, or if she was just waiting for someone to see her. My grandfather was a graveyard caretaker in the late 70s, working at Hollow Creek Cemetery, a place with a reputation. He told me a story that still haunts me. One night, while on patrol, he saw a woman in black standing near a freshly dug grave. She was weeping, her face hidden under a dark veil. "Ma'am, the cemetery is closed," my grandfather called out. She didn't move. As he got closer, the woman suddenly turned and walked directly into the open grave, except there was no sound of impact. When he ran over, the grave was empty. No sign of the woman. Shaken, he rushed back to his small office and locked the door. He tried to shake it off, thinking maybe he had imagined it. But then, 3 soft knocks came from the outside. Knock, knock, knock. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The knocks came again, this time from the window behind him. He spun around. No one was there. He stayed awake until sunrise, and as soon as his shift was over, he told his boss he was quitting. But before he left, he checked the grave's records. The burial plot belonged to Margaret Lively, a woman who had been buried 70 years earlier, and the cause of death: murder. To this day, Hollow Creek Cemetery still stands, but no caretaker has ever lasted more than a year.
In 2016, my uncle, a seasoned hunter, went deep into the woods of West Virginia for a solo trip. He had hunted in these forests for over 20 years, but this time, something was different. On his second night, as he sat near his campfire, he heard a faint whistle coming from the trees. It was a simpleton, almost like a lullaby. He called out, thinking maybe another camper was nearby, but there was no response. The whistling continued. Then, from the darkness, a voice mimicked his own, "Who's there?" My uncle froze. It was his own voice, perfectly copied but slightly distorted, like a recording played on an old cassette. He grabbed his rifle and scanned the tree line with his flashlight, and then he saw it. A tall, humanoid figure standing between the trees, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Its face was pale, featureless, except for a wide, black slit where a mouth should be, and it was still whistling. My uncle didn't wait. He packed up and hiked back to his truck, rifle in hand, constantly checking over his shoulder. The whistling followed him the entire way, always staying just out of sight. He never hunted alone again. Locals believe he encountered a skinwalker, a shape-shifting creature from Native American legend that mimics voices to lure victims into the woods.
When I was 13, my family moved into an old Victorian house in Massachusetts. The place had charm, but something always felt off. The basement was the worst part. The door leading downstairs had a huge, rusty deadbolt on the outside, as if someone had been trying to keep something inside. One night, while home alone, I heard it. Click! The sound of the deadbolt unlocking on its own. I froze. The air grew thick, heavy. Slowly, the basement door creaked open, pitch black darkness beyond it. My breathing became shallow, every instinct in me screaming not to move. Then, from the shadows of the basement, I heard the unmistakable sound of bare feet stepping on concrete. I ran. I locked myself in my bedroom and refused to come out until my parents got home. When I told them, my dad looked uneasy. He admitted something that chilled me to the bone. The previous owner had a daughter who went missing in the house. The last place she was seen, the basement. After that, we started hearing whispers at night, objects moving on their own, and footsteps coming from below. We moved out a year later, but I'll never forget the night something tried to come up from the basement. This happened to my friend, Jake, when he was driving home late one night in rural Tennessee. The road was deserted, surrounded by thick woods, with no houses for miles. At around 2:30 a.m., he saw something standing in the middle of the road. A man wearing a tattered suit, barefoot, with his head tilted back and an unnaturally wide smile on his face. Jake slowed down, debating whether to stop or drive around him. But before he could decide, the man started walking toward his car, not running, walking. His smile never changed, his eyes locked on Jake's. Jake's instinct screamed at him to leave. He slammed the gas, swerving past the man. But as he passed, the smiling figure lunged at his car, his face inches from Jake's window. Jake didn't stop. He drove all the way home, heart pounding, afraid to even look in his mirrors. A week later, he heard from a neighbor that other drivers had seen the same smiling man always at night, always on that same stretch of road. And the scariest part? Years ago, a man was hit by a car in that very spot. They said his face was stuck in a twisted, frozen grin when they found his body. Now, they say his ghost still waits for someone to stop.